Our next speaker is Mike Horne. He's the founder and director of Turf Design Studio from Sydney, Australia. He's going to talk to us about urban resilience, green infrastructure and making great places. So please welcome Mike.
Hello, and thank you for inviting me to your conference, and rest assured I'm not going to even compete with the animal noises. So I think there was enough animal noises last night, late in the evening. You're looking a bit shabby, mate, I have to say. Oh, I've got a screen down there and I've got a timer. Awesome. They were fabulous projects, by the way. They were really beautiful. I'm going to pick up a little bit on from the keynote speaker yesterday and talk about urban resilience and what we as landscape architects can do. Julian very eloquently, with a lot of stats, talked about population increase and consumption and technology, and the era that we're in, we're kind of like a fast-moving train heading towards a cliff, and we're not quite sure whether we're going to stop in time. We've got peak oil, we've got peak food, we've got peak air, we've got peak water. There's just not enough of it anymore. And how can we what can we do about that as landscape architects? Architects that do landscape, very strange beasts, as we heard yesterday. How can we repurpose our cities to overcome some of these realities? And cities are becoming bigger, denser, and more populated, and the need for nature to intervene and be purposeful in that process of being more resilient is becoming ever more urgent. And of course, climate change is just making all these impacts evident. So urban resilience, there's a lot of UN habitat. It's a pressing thing globally, and we as in our practices, I've got to learn to hit that thing a bit more. Embed that in our work, just in small ways, just helping save the planet one little tiny project at a time. It's not always huge, but we can always do something, whether it's just planting trees. And I think we are uniquely placed. We are practitioners in place, making great places. We're trained in ecology. We know about systems. We know about ecological process, and we work in communities. So how do we bring all that stuff together? Jan Gehl's, I'm sure for all of you, is a hero, and his people-focused work, I think, has always shaped our practices thinking in working with landscape, because we really believe public realm is public potential. And it's kind of like the glue that binds communities. I mean, in the end, this is where we all come together, whether it's a street, a park, a plaza. Can I just do that? Ah, yes, it's got a sticky thing. And I think we're all in this kind of room looking to create world-class cities in whatever way possible and implement world's best practice. And that means thinking and working globally sometimes, but always delivering locally. Our design process is very simple. Just dig deep, ask questions, do a lot of listening. And our design process is really this diagram. I'm sure most of you would know Maslow's hierarchy of human needs. It's very simple building block for making life, making community life. And you start with the basics, and if you get all the basics and build them up, you'll actually get to self-actualization, which is that moment when you're lying on the grass, looking up at the clouds going, it's great to be alive. So we want to create, and we all want to innovate to meet all these challenges. For communities, some projects are simply for living, some are for learning, some are just simply to play in, or just simply be. We spend so much time connected these days that sometimes we just want to turn it all off and disconnect. It should always be about like connecting with communities. And I think we all have to learn to make more with less. You know, we have got limited resources, so what can we do with it to make it really work? I think fit for purpose is a great term. I don't mean fit for purpose as in the most basic, but for all of those human needs, right up to self-actualisation. So I'm just going to turn to a couple of our projects to think about that. And they've got water in them. This first one is much more urban. To go back to Julian's message yesterday, cities are densifying. They've got to be made more resilient. They've got to fit more people fundamentally. So how do we do that? Julian was talking about densities yesterday from R20. I think he said the R is residential dwellings per hectare. R40 is like good town housing, inner city housing. This precinct at Central Park is R360. So we're talking about hyperdensities. It's Australia's densest urban neighbourhood, new neighbourhood. It's an old brewery site. Very important to learn from the history and to use that history and embed that history into the projects. It's got grain that you only get on a few projects in your life. And it was there locked, it was landlocked. It was progressively used as a brewery since the turn of last century, and just recently became 10 years, this is my 11th year on the project, it became a development site. There was an initial master plan that our client, Fraser's Property, Dr. Stanley Kwek, who's a Singaporean, was leading Fraser's Property at the time. And we inherited this plan. It was a good urban plan. You know, lots of streets. It was a classic kind of urbanist, Sydney urbanist plan. Had a park which was very beautifully located in terms of connecting to the existing neighbourhood. But this really stitched foundations for stitching the project back together. But one key thing was that it didn't have much open space. So led by Foster and Partners, I was working with my friend and colleague, Jebo Anderson, a Dane, as we've seen today, and working through in the master plan team, looking to try and get more out of this project, so getting more from less. And what we got to from the public domain perspective was, how can we move the buildings around, take a building out of the centre, shift that onto the outer perimeters? Does this have a... So there used to be a building there. We moved the densities around to the edges, the city edges, not the surrounding community edges, and created a bit more open space. We turned off a few of the streets, so took the cars out. Very kind of anti-urban move in some circles. It was controversial, but we kept all the key links, but they were just pedestrian now. And what you got was a very much increased open space. We managed to increase the open space by over 20% simply by repurposing and reallocating various bits. And if you know Central Park, it is a very dense project, and you know how used it is. And I think taking those cars out and creating a kind of an urban campus hybrid, in urban terms, is generally regarded as reasonably successful. And then, of course, you know, as we do as designers, we start making specific elements within the plan. So a whole bunch of spaces eventually came into being. But one of the key underpinnings of this project was its approach to energy and sustainability in general. You know, it's Australia's first 5-star Green Star rated precinct, and capturing all of that, but being sustainable in terms of energy was a fundamental, and being reasonably sustainable in terms of water was also key. So all the sewerage on site is processed in a black water treatment plant and then reused. So the project, this is about a few years ago. It's grown quite a lot since then, and it's very become, so I think a genuine part of the Chippendale community. Lots of different events, lots of different people, lots of different festivals. It's just become a kind of normal part of Sydney. And I guess that's one of the things we really tried to do about this project, is not over-designing it. I think having a Dane as a partner has finely tuned my sensibilities about design. It's about making a lot from using very small interventions. How can you do the most with the least again? So in the end, we made a park in the middle, and really it's just a piece of grass cut by a pathway linking the old neighbourhood to the city. But it took us 2 years to do that. And it was a constant process of taking away, instead of, because we all want to add. Our job is to create new things. We want to add things all the time. Add. But we need to take stuff away. We all need to sort of self-edit. At least that's the way we work. So, excuse me, the project's just as I said, just a place you can hang around and just simply be, and it's just a normal place. And Instagram's one of our favourite kind of ways of checking how places are going, seeing what real people are saying about these places. So you can sort of check it out via Instagram as well. So one of the key buildings in the project was the Nouvel building, which is the building covered in plants. So we were asked to do the the phase 1 feasibility and concept design work of the project. Basically, there was a lot of angst about putting so much greenery on a building. Greenwash, or was it greenwash, or was it sustainable? We had a green route strategy early, and talking with the architects, they were really keen to sort of bring that down the sides of the building, and involve Patrick Blanc, the French botanist, in the project as well. So our job was to work with Patrick and Jean Nouvel's office in coming up with a way of designing all this stuff in a kind of technical, conceptual sense, I would say. It was their ideas, but we were asked by the client to prove them up to a level of comfort where they could go out to the builder and be sent on to the rest of the subsequent design work, which I think Sasha's here, Aspect and Oculus, did a fabulous job in continuing the work. And there's a lot of planting on this project. When you add up the whole area, it's a football field of just planting. Going through the technical analysis and understanding of the project was all about light, about wind, about planting strategies, what plants would work in different aspects, what sort of soils you'd need, what were the visual relationships of the planting types, all helping the architects come to grips with what they wanted to do with the building. Where the planting would be located, there's a lot of horizontal planting. There's 5.5 kilometres of planting wrapping around the building. So it's very shallow soils. It's almost completely water dependent. Turn the irrigation off and everything starts to fade quite rapidly. That water is completely recycled, non-potable water from the Blackwater treatment plant. So without that infrastructure, that green infrastructure, embedded in the project, this sort of initiative couldn't fly, because you can't use potable water on something like this. It'd be outrageous. Planting pallets and so on. 12 Olympic-sized swimming pools worth of water per annum it takes to run that building. It's a lot of water. So when you think about using water, you've got to use it wisely. But if you recycle it, I think it's delivered an amazing building. Where do I live? I live about there. I decided I'd go and live in my project. it's fabulous. It's you open up the sliding doors in the morning and you're just greeted with this kind of veil of perfumed humidity. Makes living in an apartment something different, something new. Yeah, and it's the, I think, it's not, doesn't always have to be green totally, but it's for $160 per quarter, I get a garden in the sky. It's not too bad. A couple of stats about where that was. I think I talked about mostly about that. 21 panels of Patrick Blanc's vertical green, 5.5 kilometres of facade planter boxes, not to mention the cables and the vines. So when you look at the actual plan area, it's of what is green with the vines, it's way more than, it's probably 2 football fields. There's a little project just as part of Central Park, which is right here. It's just a little aside really, because it's got nothing to do with water, but it's everything to do with resilience in terms of just respecting the heritage of the area and using that and repurposing that heritage in a new way. I mean, this project's right in the epicenter of the kind of dawn of the Asian century in Sydney. There's enormous change going on in Sydney with Chinese investment, Chinese students. It's education. There's a huge boom, which and combined with the population demographics of Australia, and I suspect here it's going to continue for years to come. The demographics are that in 12 years' time, at 2030, the millennials in the room will be the dominant population in Australia. So, because they're the second bubble behind the boomers. So things are going, there's a lot of change happening, and I think it's exciting. And we're going to be dealing with these pressures as landscape architects for many years. So this was just how to repurpose a little laneway. Dr. Quek had this great idea of taking out all the side fences between all those old terraces, and some of those are soldier settlements going back to 1850s. 1850s in Sydney is quite old. And turning it into a little thing called Spice Alley. So kind of like working with the Chinese population, working with the student population, creating a kind of a market for food, a very Singaporean idea. So we work with Tonkin Zuleika Greer architects, fabulous contemporary architects, but with a great nuanced feeling for old buildings. And just, again, keep trying to let the spirit of the place be. I think we spent probably a year figuring out that we only really needed one paving. It just needed to be a blue-black kind of brick, and just create a floor and let all these disparate, eclectic buildings, just beautifully restored buildings, just kind of sit there and let things happen. We're just making the kind of set for everyday life. And a lot of life happens there. It's a very bustling little very popular laneway in Sydney now. So I thought the second project that I wanted to talk about is completely different, but in some ways very similar, because it's repurposing a piece of the city. This time it's an old. It's repurposing it as a piece of green infrastructure in an existing fairly simple park. Sydney Park has been around for a few years. It started as a brickworks back in early last century. As what happens with brickworks and quarries, they get filled up with garbage. It got turned into a waste dump, and then it got turned into what do you do with a waste dump in the middle of the city? You turn it into a park. Usually with about this much soil over the top. You're not allowed to dig into that too much either. So we're working in a heavily remediated, polluted environment. So just given there's 1943 and 6 years ago, It had been a park. It's been progressively developed as a park since the early 90s, last century. It started as a public works project. It's had a series of master plans. I think the most recent was Aspect's master plan in 2004. And then it's had a series of interventions since. It's 44 hectares. That should read the Water Reuse Project 16 of those hectares. The project is a joint City of Sydney federal government initiative, so it's jointly funded. The state government likes to trumpet this project but had no involvement in it whatsoever. Ironic. But there is a specific target, and why it's supported by the federal government is its objective to reuse the water. So it's bioremediation but with an end use. So the project, there's been some great work by others, like a lot of projects we work on, including the old heritage projects. You work you stand on the shoulders of others, and I think that's really important and fundamental part of our work is to understand that and build on that. It's a legacy that we get. So, whoops, I'm pointing at the wrong thing. Fabulous park by JMD Design in Sydney. Some work by ACOM initially in the early stage. It was a pilot project. We inherited all this work and built on it. So our project is about harvesting this catchment. It's broadly thought of as the Newtown catchment. It's very inner city Sydney, and it's basically collecting all the street water using harvesting the low flow. Down before it gets into Alexandria Canal. So all this water drains here. We collect it and send it into a series of bioremediation, I would call them eco-paddies, clipped onto an existing badly degraded series of lagoons. The water goes through those bioremediation beds, then empties into the lagoons, then we turn the lagoons over as a final polishing. And that delivers 330, on average, Olympic-sized swimming pools of water for use by the park first, and then as non-potable water for local industries. There's a lot of concrete batching plants and so on nearby. What we did when we pitched for the work was we had a kind of unusual team. I asked my friends Jenny Turpin and Michaela Crawford, they're artists, to come and work on the project with us, not as artists, but not to create any art. They kind of looked at me a bit strangely. But we had an ecologist, Mia, amazing woman, and we had the eco engineers. But it was just great to have another voice at the table that just thought about things a little bit differently. And really it was very much a kind of a round table collaboration, all with a common sort of goal of how can we sort of explore this idea of this piece of infrastructure and express it in the most interesting way possible. And the other key fundamental from the city's point of view was habitat. So all of these eco-paddies are viable habitats. We work very closely with the city's ecologists and there's a lot of, these things are just teeming with biodiversity now. Frogs, dragonflies, lots of invertebrates, lots of lizards and so on. The project started in 2013, construction, and there you can see it going through various phases. This was an old detention pond which we just repurposed. We refurbished it and made it the first wetland. And you can see that up the top there. It's a lot higher, so that's also a receiving water for some of the storm flows, which are obviously cleaner. So it kind of bypasses the bioretention. Jenny and Michaela ended up doing some art, ironically. The city couldn't resist. But the art's really just an expression of the system. It's not a piece of art that is conceived separately. It's conceived as a member of the design team, and I think it's beautiful. It really picks up, as you can see on the chimneys. They just really laid this kind of delivery, the old delivery system of the chimneys of the brickwork, and laid it over and cut them open and made that the delivery system for the water. So you can see it there at the top, running through a series of wetlands via a cascade. There's a cascade. We really wanted to have people get into this thing and experience it. It's kind of an urban wild, if you will. It's not many places where children can kind of run free and feel like they're uninhibited and unprogrammed. Of course, it's very carefully designed so that there's safety always, but there is this feeling you can just immerse yourself. This is a little fun bit of the project. This was how we dealt with delivering the dirty water into the bioremediation ponds. So we had to bifurcate the flow. The width of the channels matches the size of the wetland, essentially, that we're delivering to. It's sort of an aerial view of it. So this is where the dirty water comes in. That's one of the bioremediation areas. You can see they're fenced. This is a dog park as well. This is an off-leash dog park. So you can imagine yet another layer to this thing is managing the conflicts. As all projects do, we manage conflicts between various users, and these are biodiversity hotspots. So the dogs aren't allowed in. I'm kind of putting this up to show off a little bit. But also to say to all of us here in the Antipodes that we do some pretty good bloody work, and we have lots of great architects and landscape architects coming in from various parts of the world to work in Sydney, and I see no reason why all our great work shouldn't be shared around the world as well. So it's great to have recognition in the UK for this project, and it's really the nature of the project that's being recognised. But I would just say to us all, we hold our heads up high. We do some fabulous. We're good thinkers down here. And of course, it's always about just making places where people can just do this sort of thing. It's a project where you just hang out, you just walk around it and lose yourself from the day to day, be with as much nature, albeit made nature. This is all on a garbage dump. This is completely sitting on landfill. There's no part of this project that's not on landfill. We did have to dig into it. We pulled out refrigerators and bits of car bodies and all sorts of things. This is another part of the artwork, which is the delivery pipes from the bioretention into the lagoons. These lagoons were before we started were just isolated lagoons, blue-green algal outbreaks every summer. There wasn't enough water flowing through the whole system. The bird life was suffering. Dogs were dying. But these days, we get these little critters. Get lots of little frogs and lizards. Birds just teeming, especially all the smaller birds. I'm not a bird expert, but just making sure that you get enough small planting and enough refuge and protection. Some of these trees were back from the early master plan. You can see these figs, they're 20 years old. They were planted in the garbage and just became stunted things. They're like pot plants. But today it's growing. It's getting better. There'll be more projects, I'm sure, in this 44 hectares. It's very diverse. We've had the privilege of just working in one part of it. We did do a little bike path here too, but that's another story. And again, just go on Instagram and see how people love the park. I think they love the dogs more than the park somehow. I think as it should be, I think. The park is just the place where you can love your dog. You don't have to love the park. Plenty of people do though, but thank you anyway for your time.